It's kind of a ubiquitous thing in American culture. First of all, circumcision actually predates recorded history. It's been around probably since the Stone Age. And in fact, there are some references in the Bible where it talks about Moses' wife cutting her son's foreskin with a sharpened piece of stone.
Yeah, Exodus 4.
And there's lots of references to stone knives. This suggests that the tradition actually originated in the Stone Age, when they would actually use sharpened flint knives to do this. So it's a very ancient tradition. It's really tied to notions of ritual purity, and it was seen primarily in religions and cultures that had a strong emphasis on cleanliness. And specifically in Egypt, it was always associated with sun god worship. So whenever it was practiced, it was associated with the sun god worship. And I guess there is one historical account that, or probably a lot, that talked about the sun god Ra, who circumcised himself, and from the blood of his circumcision created 2 other minor deities from that. So,
wow, that's a brave guy. Ra.
Indeed. Self-circumcision actually is practiced among some fetishists. You can even buy the implements of such things from these fetish sites. So if anyone is so inclined, there they go. So I will not provide access to that information. Right? You can Google it. So then when we talk about circumcision in this country, we're really getting this tradition. It's really derived from the Jewish tradition, so I want to talk a little bit about that.
Sure.
Jewish law talks about circumcising males on the 8th day. That's in Genesis chapter 17. And they probably got this custom from the Egyptians, just because of the close association there. And the fact that you're talking about cutting part of the male member, not surprising given that we're basically talking about a Canaanite fertility cult here. So the fact that they would do something to sacrifice a part of the male member, in many cases this was seen as the same thing as pruning a bush to increase its production. So it was tied to notions of fertility and suitability for marriage, as well as ritual cleanliness and purity. So
that's the the passage you were talking about earlier, Exodus 4. I think it's verses 24 through 26 or whatever. Basically, Moses and his wife Zipporah are traveling, and they're in their tent, and God decides that He's going to come and kill Moses. And they don't really say why, but the presumption, based on the moral of the story, is that they hadn't actually circumcised their young child yet. So God comes down to the tent to kill Moses, but his wife wakes up, realizes what's going on, grabs a sharp stone, does the circumcision on their little kid, and then throws the bloody remnant at the feet of Moses, and this scares God off. Well, in fairness, if you read the Bible, God then decides that He's not going to kill Moses after all. I wouldn't want to say that you could scare God off, but sure seemed that way.
Yes. And according to Jewish law, it's the father's responsibility to ensure that his son is circumcised. And he has the right to perform the circumcision himself. Now, most fathers choose to appoint a surrogate to do this, and they can appoint a specially trained rabbi called a moil who will do the circumcision. Now, a ritual Jewish circumcision consists of 3 parts. There's the actual cutting part. Then there's the part where the moil will tear the glands, or the foreskin from the glands, usually with a sharpened fingernail.
And it's important to, we didn't bring in a whole bunch of pictures.
Yeah.
And we do want to do a whole anatomy course. But the reason for that is that the foreskin in newborns isn't retractable.
Yes.
And it's still attached to the glands. And this doesn't actually become retractable necessarily until about age 5 or around then, and perhaps even later.
Yes.
So what he's got to do is actually a tearing procedure. I apologize for grimacing all through this show, but it's, as somebody who possesses a penis, this is a little uncomfortable. But there's a tearing of the glands in order to get them back to where they can put the implement on to start the cutting or continue the cutting.
And then after the foreskin is torn from the glands, then there's a final part of it which requires that the mohel take some wine in his mouth and then put his mouth on the infant's penis and suck the blood from that and then spit the wine and the blood in a receptacle.
Yes, you actually heard that right.
Yes.
This is Orthodox Judaism. This is the procedure.
Yes.
Now, to be fair, I have no reason to think that all Orthodox Jews are actually following this procedure. It kind of fell out of fashion, and then they were like, oh, no, we're not doing that, we're not doing that. And you heard fewer and fewer horror stories about it.
Yes.
But as recently as 2003, there was a rabbi/doctor who, the concern, and I think he got this backwards. There's a concern because of, and I don't know if you were going to get to this, where there were reports that some children have been infected.
Yes.
With syphilis and other things that they've got from the rabbi through this procedure. As concerns for HIV mounted, this particular rabbi, and I apologize, for some reason I thought I had his name on here and I don't, he wrote, a final concern involves circumcision. In the Orthodox rite, after making the incision, the mole actually sucks the wound to draw out the blood and promote clotting. Okay. Maybe you should talk to a doctor about, sucking blood out of a wound to promote clotting. I'm pretty sure that pressure is one of the preferred methods. But since babies can acquire the virus through their mothers, this creates risks for moles.
Yeah.
Wait a minute, you got it all backwards. I mean, your primary concern is that some AIDS baby is going to infect the rabbi who's trying to suck the blood off of the circumcision. What? I mean, that's nuts. Let's talk about the okay, maybe there is a medical concern there, but there's also a concern of the rabbi infecting the kid. How about we just look at both of them and say, this is insane. Let's try not to infect anybody. But this guy says that the problem is really pretty easy to resolve because the AIDS virus cannot survive in a solution of 75% alcohol. So just swish some 150 proof rum around in your mouth and you won't get infected. That's the solution they come up with.
Yeah. Yeah, and in fact, mohels actually have infected 8-day-old infants with not only syphilis, but tuberculosis, human papillomavirus, and a whole host of other
So basically, almost
diseases.
any disease that they said circumcision would cure 100 years ago has been transmitted to a child because of this particular procedure.
Yes.
Woo!
And even, not even in just ritual Jewish circumcisions, but in other types of circumcisions, mass circumcisions of boys in, for example, Turkey, where it's very common to circumcise a boy between the age of 6 and 10. Tribal circumcisions in Africa. These types.
There's a new story this week on that. A guy by the name of Buntu Mahalasa, who had a degree in organizational psychology from the University of Cape Town. To his friends, he was an inspiring Christian youth leader, and he's dead. He went out into the bush to be indoctrinated into adulthood. At the age of 25, he was tied up for days and severely beaten, but that's not what killed him. He died of septicemia that set in after a botched circumcision.
Right.
Now, I realize that this is not, I don't want to equate this to the medical procedure. The instance, I don't want to be unfair in the treatment of the subject. The instance of complications, even in hospitals, is still around 2%. And while this is an extreme case, okay, we're out in the woods and we probably didn't follow a good medical procedure. The fact of the matter is that even following the best medical procedures, there's a risk, and you don't want to just dismiss that as, oh, this is an average everyday surgery, even though it is every day.
Yeah.
There's still a risk.
Yes. And one thing I wanted to get back to on this Jewish tradition was this ritual about tearing the foreskin from the glands. That wasn't a part of the original requirement under ritual Jewish circumcision. That originated in, I think, around 200 BCE, and it was because a bunch of Jewish males decided to go they wanted to participate in Greek games, and in Greece, it was considered very discourteous to expose your glands. In fact, it was prohibited during the games. So what most Greek men would do is they would take a short piece of string and tie it around the end of their foreskin to make sure that there were no inadvertent exposures. And so the Jewish males who wanted to participate in these games were obliged to do the same. What happened over time is that it actually stretched their foreskins out, and so when they returned home,